It's vanilla, chocolate. We're at the latter part of chapter 12 of Kings 1. We're learning a very, very heavy matter, and that is, what does Yerovam do? Yerovam, remember, what does he do to ensure, to stabilize, to continue his kingdom over Israel, namely 10 of the 12 tribes? As we learned a generation ago, during the time of Rechavam, the son of King Solomon, the house of David was torn. Rechavam will not have a successor. Rather, in the next generation, or in that generation actually, Shlomo's will not have a successor, Rechavam, but only partly, and that is that Yerovam will be appointed as king, as the prophet is sent, Achia Hashiloni, sir, and that's what happened. But there was a lot of turmoil that brought about the prophetic realization, and that was that Rechavam was not really a special leader. He made several mistakes. He wanted to impose continued high taxation on the nation, and there we see that this wise man called Yerovam, who was shrewd, wise, intelligent, scholarly like no one else in the generations. We brought the Gemara in Sanhedrin, yet he too also had the midav ga'ava, the attribute of haughtiness, of pride. He's thinking by himself and taking advice with others what can be done to assure his continuation. And he says, well, what am I going to do if everyone goes to the Holy Temple 3 times a year? There's a famous Gemara that talks about, are you allowed or not to sit as a king in the temple area where the Azra, the courtyard, is? So the Talmud says, no one can sit in the courtyard of the temple but a king from the house of David. So the Gemara says, well, gee, I'm going to come up, I'm religious, right? Yerovam is a God-fearing Jew. I'm going to go for Passover or any other holiday to the Temple Mount, and only one person who's going to have the great honor of sitting in the courtyard, that'll be who? Rechavam. Gee, people are going to look at him. They're going to look at me. It's not going to be like a tennis match going back and forth, looking one at another. But what are they going to think? Who's number one? Rechavam, and not me. He says, I can't allow this to happen. This is a Talmudic legend, Agadah, a Midrashic event story that just brings into light what is the problem with Yerovam that he's having here. And he decides, out of a halachic mind, why don't, who's the one that says, what, there's Shechina, divine presence, only in between the wings, hovering over the what? The Holy Ark, inside the Holy of Holies? That's mapitom. There's divine presence everywhere in Eretz Yisrael. What did you say? Only the Kohanim are holy? That they're the ones can be issuing the korbanot? Isn't all of Am Yisrael holy? Very nice. Very. This analogy, this metaphorical questions that we're raising, many rabbis explain when they're delivering a shiur here. I heard this from Rav Castillo. I heard this from others. In other words, Yerovam is thinking it's not enough that the nation did not want the house of David because of the high taxation. You need ideology. You need spiritual outlets. Let me then think of what? A spiritual outlet that's totally kosher with a certificate of kashrut. And let me build in 2 places in the land of Israel, one in the periphery area, up in Dan, under the Hermon Mountains, and the other in what's that holy place next to Yerushalayim? The house of who? Beit El. Let me build a place to serve God, and I'll provide an alternative. He's not thinking whatsoever, God forbid, of what? Idolatry. That's not his cup of tea. He totally believes in one God. But right now he's using his halachic mind and his wizardry to create an alternative. Instead of people going to Yerushalayim, well, they'll serve God here. And he puts 2 eglei zahav, 2 golden calves. One of the reasons we explained in our last year, right? The shore, the strength of the ox is the what? The symbol of the tribe of Yosef. And maybe 2 represents his 2 sons, Ephraim and Menachem, that are represented here. These are part of many other explanations. And all of this is saying, God is here as well. God is in Beit El. Beit El is a holy place. Yaakov Avinu's prophetic dream there. Avram made a stop there and a second stop in the land of Israel. We see Beit El was conquered during the time of Yoshua. Beit El is a holy place. And Dan, Ken up north, why should I make it hard on people to go serve God? Let them take a local bus. Maximum from Tiberias to Dan is much closer than from Tiberia to Yerushalayim. And make it easy on people.
When was it enacted that you don't do korbanot in Yerushalayim?
Right. Once we have the Beit HaMikdash and all the other places. Here he's thinking maybe we're going back to the time that maybe private altars for Am Yisrael are allowed. There are some commentators that talk about it as if he's bringing Israel back to the time pre-Beit HaMikdash, that you could build an altar in this place or that place, again, to here. But right now he's not even thinking of sacrificing. And that's what we read in verse 29. Vayasam et echad bebeit El, ve'et echad natan bedan. However, do you remember the author, which prophet is writing this book?
Writing the book is
Yirmiyahu. That's right, Yirmiyahu. Hundreds of years later, right? Yirmiyahu, who saw the destruction of the first temple a few hundred years from now. Read Pasuk Lamed with me. It says, verse 30, V'yad davar zeh lechatat, v'yelchu ha'am lifnei ha'echad adan. This setup of 2 places to serve the Holy One eventually, I'm adding the word eventually, led to sin. In other words, there's a flaw here. Eventually, what he's writing now in verse 30 is going to happen in the upcoming chapters. That this place turns into a place of serving God, even in sacrifices, which will certainly be disallowed when we have a Beit HaMikdash here. Now, to show how people became so religiously oriented around this idea of Yerevan, who was considered one of the greatest scholars of the generation, even the local people not far from Beit El, do you know what they did? When it came time to serve God, they made a long trip out of religiosity, out of cleaving on to God. They said, I'm going to take the long bus from wherever I'm in the middle of the Shomron, all the way up to the Dan area under the Hermon Mountains in the Upper Galilee. Why? I want to show God that what? I'm a tough fighter. I can travel far, hours. Those days, your buggy and carriage, it took many, many hours to get up there, of course. Okay? There is a term, some of you may have heard. What happens when you try to do a mitzvah and you travel a long distance and you don't get to do the mitzvah? Do you get reward for going? That term is called schar psiot, right? You've heard of that term? That's called the reward for tracking, for walking. I'm getting reward, Ken. You go to a long distance synagogue instead of going 5 minutes away, and you traveled a half an hour. That's called schar psiot. People of this generation were looking for difficulty to serve God. They were looking for, a long trip out of religiosity. So that's what people started doing. Instead of going close by to Beit El, let's say it's in the Shomron, it's in Tel Aviv, you're living in Kfar Saba, Ranan, instead of going to Beit El, you're going to all the way up to Dan. That's what people are doing. Furthermore, in an attempt to show that everyone in the Jewish people have equal holiness, and that you don't necessarily need who the Judean Republic is using, the house of David, using Kohanim, what does he do? First in verse 31, Vayas et Beit Bamot. So here, these two shrines in Beit El and Dan turn into a place of a bama. Some of you know, is number one, in a higher place, elevated. And it's used now, like we learned and used in the book of Shoftim, in the book of the former Sefer, and before Samuel. It's turned into a place of an altar. Now, what do you do on an altar? Sacrifice. But what is the law regarding sacrifices when we have a place of centrality in Yerushalayim? It's not allowed. This is what's happening. They're making this place into a place. No, this is not happening one day after the other. This could be a term of years. But right now we're not studying a history book, and therefore the Tanakh doesn't share with us really how long this proceeded into a place of bamot, sacrificing on an altar. Furthermore, if they're bringing sacrifices, who's doing the sacrificing? Vayas Kohanim miksotam asher lo yimei b'nei Levi. He has an alternative from the tribe of Levi. I don't need Kohanim. I beg your pardon. All Jews have holiness. And I'm going to take dafka the ones that are kitsotam, the people that are thought of less important, from the peripheral areas, from the extreme areas, meaning from farther away. So he envisions and understands that I can support this system. In other words, what we're seeing and learning here is that things are now getting out of hand. Again, we don't know what term of time. But what's happening here is there's this spiritual ideology backing up the office of Yeravam. He started out thinking, what must I do in God's eyes to assure the prophecy of God to Achia that I'm going to be the king? Certainly, we can't continue serving God in Yerushalayim. Why not? Because there's equal holiness everywhere. There's holiness here, there's holiness there. And if people go to Yerushalayim, obviously they're gonna be persuaded by Rechavam, the king of the house of David, and there's not going to be support from me. How can that happen? I can't allow. I'm not stupid. That's what he's thinking, taking advice with scholars and so on and so forth. And therefore now he comes up with religious ideology that we can appoint others to be the priests doing this work inside these two places. Again, you need to continue backing this up, further religious ideology, further halakha. And now, Yeravam comes up with another idea. Pasuk Lamed Bet, 32. Vayas Yerovam Chag. When? B'chodesh Hashmini. That's the month after the month of Tishrei, isn't it? The month of Tishrei is the 7th month. When? B'chamisha Asar Yom LaChodesh. Wow. Exactly in the middle of the month. What's going on with the moon that night? Full moon. That's exactly what's done the month before. Kechag Asher B'Yehuda. Just like the holiday that's done by Yehuda, meaning the month before. So he's creating here, and you ask yourself, what is the importance? Ken, what is the importance? The importance here is, again, an alternative to the pilgrimage, an alternative to Aliyah L'Regel. If Jews are going to be coming up in the month of Tishrei, they're not going to give me the support. What will be done instead? I'm going to create a parallel holiday. I'm going to delay maybe the Sukkot holiday to another month. It could be that's what he means. Or it could mean as well, he's making a leap year. There are those that explain that as if he's turning Tishrei into a Tishrei Bet month, creating a leap year. Instead of celebrating Sukkot in the 7th month, he'll celebrate Sukkot in the 8th month, of course, on the 15th day. And by doing so, you'll create what? Less traffic to Yerushalayim, more traffic to Beit El and to Dan. And that's what he's doing. And what is he doing? Lizabeach. You see, things are getting out of hand. People are now doing sacrificing. La'agalim asharasa, to those agalim. And they're thinking that they're serving God this way. Ve'mid beveit el et kohanei abamot asharasa. So we see what he's doing. He has his own kohanim. His own kohanim are not from the tribe of Levi. A kohen is someone that's serving God. Therefore, he'd be called a kohen. And therefore, we're told by the prophet in verse 33 that Vayal ala mizbeach asher asa beveit el. He himself, Yeravam, is standing by the mizbeach that he himself allowed to be coming into making. Beveit el, when? B'chamisha Asar Yom, on the 15th of which month? B'chodesh hashmini, b'chodesh asher bada melibo. Here, we already see the prophet criticizing this matter. Bada melibo, he created it by himself. He made it up by himself. Vayaschag levnei Yisrael, vayal ala mizbeach laktir. So it's quite clear right now that Yeravam has created his own chag, his own place of service, and it seems really that he's created a religious alternative. It started off maybe in a proper way that he thought was proper, but as you see, when you make alterations in the eternal Torah, these alterations, that's called reformism. You've heard of the word reform? Reform. Reform means to make a change. He meant good. He thought that this is going to be in the line of thinking of the prophet Achia, who comes from the house of Yosef, by the way. He's from the area of Shiloh. This will provide well things. But we see when we're making alterations, it's causing a lot of problems.
You don't know what's going to come after.
You don't know what's going to come out. So here we see that the objective of Yeravam was to free himself of the Beit HaMikdash, to free himself of the Levite tribe that are providing the Kohanim, and maybe go back to what was called once Bamat Yachid. Bamat Yachid is the high place that an individual was allowed to build in his backyard. Okay? When we were in between the Mishkan in Shiloh and the Beit HaMikdash, or prior to that, a person was able to build his own high place with a mizbeach, an altar there, yet he would only be allowed to bring personal korbanot, namely volunteer sacrifices, what are called in the language of the Chazal, nidarim and nidavot, these volunteer offerings, whereas obligatory offerings, things that are related to the public, okay, and things related to holiday offerings that belong to the public, of course, would not be able to be brought on the bamot. There was a central altar in Givon. There was a central altar in Nov. Only in those places were we allowed to do so. So we see right now, we're really learning about the deterioration of Torah law here north of Yerushalayim, led by a wizard, a genius in Torah, that the Talmud says there was no blemish in his Torah study, he knew it all, yet apparently it's not enough to know Torah. The midot, the proper attributes, have to be making the Jewish individual into a proper receptacle. Remember, we are, in a somewhat understanding, we're a kli. We all are like a kelim. We're like receptacles. The more we inspire ourselves with Torah and making ourselves a kli through the proper attributes, with carefulness and with humility and with modesty, all the proper midot, attributes, that makes the kli a better receptacle for Torah, for rabbinical understanding of Torah to be applied. But if the kli has I and myself as maybe the most important thing, and not here we see he suffered from it. We'll re-mention what we said in our other shiurim, the famous midrash, where God says, "You, Sunny boy," and just stop there for a second. I'd like to invite you to a tiyul. You and King David and I in the Garden of Eden, the midrash says. Yoram says, 1 second. Who's going to be leading the pack? And God says in the midrash, David, of course, is. He says, if it's David, I'm not coming. That is the metaphorical midrash legend. In other words, why is he not coming? He cannot see only that he is the leader. He has to be the leader. I cannot accept authority without me being the top authority. So too here. Right now, this haughtiness, this arrogance that he has is warping his Torah mind. And that can happen. And this is a classic case that when a person doesn't have the proper midot, no matter how much Torah he knows, that Torah could be strayed aside, that could be misunderstood. And then here we see one mistake leading to the next mistake. And therefore right now, in this finale of chapter 12 that we're learning right here, we're seeing that terrible things are happening again. Remember, don't be misled. We're not understanding that this is happening in 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. That's not an element. We're not studying history of the Jewish people. We're studying Tanakh. And what is the point of Tanakh? How God reveals himself through the prophets, through the kings, through the Jewish people, in order to teach us ideas, lessons, values that Hashem wants to bring home. Certainly, the fact that all of this was written and brought to us right now is in order to teach us many important lessons, okay? And that is that Hashem wants us to learn for future generations how we go about serving Hashem. How we go about serving Hashem even during a time of stress, when there are problems there between the son of the house of David and someone else. Hashem never told Yeravam to do this or to do that. Yeravam was told he's going to be the king. Now, just to bring a point home, is Yeravam allowed to be king? Well, he doesn't come from the tribe of Yehuda. So is he allowed to be king? Answer, certainly for temporary time. He was appointed king by God through a legal prophet, through a real prophet called Achias Shiloni. It could very well be, as we're going to be learning in the upcoming chapters, that this setup for having another king from the tribe of Yosef is only a temporary matter. I wanted to bring to your attention, Ken, when we just celebrated Hanukkah, and we learned about the Hashmonaic dynasty from the tribe of Levi. That's not a simple matter, because Levi is not the house of Yehuda, and the scepter is not allowed to be taken away from Yehuda. So how do we understand this matter? So you should know the Rambam, Maimonides. The Ramban, Nachmanides. He differs vehemently against the idea that the Hashmonaim would lead a dynasty of kings generation after generation. And he wants to prove his point, the Ramban says, by what? The fact that how many sons did Matityahu have? 4 or 5? They were all killed in war. He wants to say that's a point of punishment that they established a kingdom. Okay? They were not supposed to be the king. And the fact that later on, the next king was who? What? Ken. And they came from, they were Edomite. He was an Edomite. No, that's
the Edomites were
what was his name? The Edomite Ger that became king, Herod. What did he do? He wiped out anyone and everyone from the Hashmonaic dynasty. So how did God allow such a thing? So Ramban, in a very long essay, writes that this was a mistake. They're not supposed to be the king. The Rambam, we can understand from the laws of kings, differs against the Ramban. But of course, this is an accepted opinion. So here, Yeravam is making several mistakes, all to do out of his haughtiness. And B'ezrat Hashem will continue from this point tomorrow, same place, same time. I apologize.